So my work has distinct parts. So I work with the family and ancestors, family constellations, and I work with sound and teaching very deep and radical forms of understanding the voice as a contemplative and in meditative practice, including teaching the overtone chanting and many forms of breathing and many forms of using the voice as a coherent practice within a group to bring the group into sonorous meditation and very profound states both together and individually. And then another factor of my work, which I do twice a year in my extended Healing Voice Week intensives, 5 days of those. The first weekend usually is devoted to the kind of voice practices and the overtone chanting I was just referring to. But then 5 days of those weeks is devoted to a ceremony which came to me in 2003, having spent 40 years deeply rooted in and studying Dzogchen in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And I became very familiar with the story of the mandala, which comes in the Tibetan book, the so-called Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Todrul, the book of becoming enlightened in the immediate aftermath after death through sound and hearing. That's the correct translation. And in this book, which is known as a terma, it was so-called hidden by an earlier enlightened being and then found, a few centuries later. And this so-called Tibetan Book of the Dead describes in it the mandala. And the mandala is the structure of consciousness. It's actually a manifestation of the stupa. So before the Buddha, who was actually depicted as a human being rather late and came when the Buddhists met the Greeks in Afghanistan. So before that there were no depictions of the Buddha. After that there were, but he wears a toga and sandals and he looks like a Greek sculpture. So that's why the Buddha looks Greek, because he is. But before that there were just stupas. There were square bases, round middles, umbrella-y things, structures called stupas, which you rotated around, and as you rotate around you aspire to the still point in the center. And there are many of these in Sri Lanka. There are two very big ones in Nepal, in Kathmandu. The biggest is known as Bodhanath. And if you look from above over Bodhanath, for example, you can see that the ground plan of the stupa is almost identical with the mandala. So the mandala has 4 directional entries, gates, 4 directional Buddhas, a central Buddha, and different colors according to the different afflictive emotions, which when transformed become their corresponding wisdoms. And so within the understanding of the mandala is all the structure of consciousness. So in Buddhism there is no such thing as a self. That's the ultimate delusion. There are these different ways that we move through form, sensation, discrimination, volition, and consciousness. These are known as the skandhas, or the heaps, the elements of consciousness. And then these afflictive emotions are ignoring what is. There is no separation, acting as if there is, and then liking or not liking, rejecting or claiming or wanting or being fearful or jealous or wanting too much or being angry, reactive patterns, which so for example anger is one of the afflictive emotions in the east of the mandala, and the wisdom of anger, the flip side of anger, the corresponding wisdom, the liberating energy field, if you like, of anger is mirror-like wisdom, which means seeing things in a mirror, as in a mirror. Because if you see things as they are, there is nothing to react to. And anger is our reaction to things being not what we want them to be. And so if we see things as they are, not as we want them to be, if we see things as they are, then there's nothing to react to. There's no anger because we don't have any expectations of things being other than they are. So each of these directions in the mandala are very profound in terms of our own psyche and understanding our nature. And so what I realized was that having written the book The Mystic Spiral in 1973, which is this book about the journey of the soul, the rotational journey of the soul, and working a lot with the labyrinth, which is a rotational journey to the center, where once you're in the center you have to come back out into everyday life again. I realized that this is what the mandala was. It's a journey around the stupa, and when you get to the center of the mandala you have to come back into the outside world again. And so my realization led me to enacting this, creating a kind of ceremony where we, the group, become the mandala. And so over the course of 5 days we have these sort of 4 circles, and we move around through the whole mandala, starting at one place and ending the same place that we began 5 days later, but totally transformed, having worked with our afflictive emotions, having worked with all kinds of different psychological aspects, but always within a continuous chant. So each of the mandalas has a different theme. Each of the mandala has a different practice. Each mandala has continuous chant, but different chant. And so the one I just did in the spring was related to green Tara, and in the spring I rotate through the different Taras. So one year I'll do green Tara, one year yellow Tara, which is about having and not having, and a red Tara, which is about relationships, a white Tara, which is about health and longevity. And so these different qualities of the Taras. And in the autumn, because I do them over the cross-quarter days, so I do them over May Day, which is when the veil is drawn back and it's easier to make contact with a transcendent world. And October, the Festival of the Dead, in the cross-quarter days, I do another mandala in London. The spring one is in the Somerset countryside. The one in over the Festival of the Dead, which is Samhain in the Celtic tradition, which is All Souls, All Saints, because they're usually Christianized. Beltane was never Christianized because it was too pagan, too about the penetration of the earth by the heavens, and so not possible to Christianize. But the Festival of the Dead at the end of October is Halloween, is the evening of All Hallows, of All Souls, All Saints Day, followed by All Souls, the day for everybody else. So during this week, I rotate every year. I do a different mandala theme, and 2 of those are about conscious dying. So the Tibetans have, because the journey through the bardo, the journey through the mandala, is actually a description of the what happens after death. The journey of becoming enlightened from the moment of death, and if we're unable to become enlightened, then each day is another working with a different afflictive emotion until we are enlightened. And so during this end of October, beginning of November week, I have these 2 ceremonies involving a Tibetan practice for conscious dying. And in Tibetan Buddhism, conscious dying is a completely essential part of spiritual practice, and the dream practice is a rehearsal in a way. We have every night we have a situation where we're more separate from our physical body. Our minds can wander around, wander off, and become apparently separate from our body, and so it's like a rehearsal for the post-mortal state. So conscious dreaming, as well as being a practice in and of itself for enlightenment, can be a practice run for the post-mortal state, which is seen as a moment for becoming enlightened, where the body and the rest, the energetic being, are again most separate of all.